Good morning. KJ7T is in the booth. This edition of the Random Wire podcast, called Random Wire Reflections, talks about the content coming up in issue 99 of the Random Wire Review, publishing this Friday, July 19th at 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm a little off schedule today. I had expected to record this on Saturday morning, but got wrapped up in the very topic I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Like a dog with a bone, I couldn't quite let it go until I felt I had chewed on all the most obvious issues. Issue 99 follows up on the all-Starlink focused issue 98. The reason for this is I got a wild idea that I chose to test for issue 99. That idea was, if ASL3 runs in virtual machines, why can't we take a working virtual machine and import it to a cloud server like Vultr? That is exactly what I spent all day Saturday working on. However, there is a bigger question to consider, and that is, why do we make it so hard to get up and running with All-Starlink? When I look at what I've written for issue 99, I'm compelled to hit the pause button and step back for a moment, way back. Issue 99 is full of difficult technical bits, and truth be told, that is information that most of us probably don't want. I think there are more fundamental questions to consider. I just asked why we make All-Starlink so hard. Another question relates to the ability to run ASL3 in virtual machines, and that is, where are the pre-built nodes that can be downloaded as virtual machines? The ability to run ASL in a virtual machine opens up a host of possibilities. Consider these ideas that come to mind without much effort. Take your home node with you when you travel. My node 588411 running on my server in a VirtualBox virtual machine could easily be copied to my laptop when I travel. Or, a node based on a virtual machine also makes it easy to make a working copy as a backup in case you muck something up with your node. Or, running a node in a virtual machine makes the node more of an appliance. I think a lot of hams don't want to crack open the case and look inside. Rather, they want to buy the radio or the thing, plug it in, and just use it. A node in a virtual machine would work much the same way. And what about the hardware vendors who are selling USB devices that plug into nodes? For example, the Hotspot Radio USB device by Hotspot Radio plugs into computers and into Raspberry Pis. Imagine being able to buy this $100 device and download a virtual machine that is already properly configured to use it. You would have a low-cost, working All-Starlink node without much fuss or bother. All this is to say that I think we're missing a bet here that could help bring more people into our amateur radio hobby. I like All-Starlink because the audio quality is so very good, and there is a lot of flexibility in how you deploy a node. Making pre-built nodes available as virtual appliances would remove one of the big barriers to entry, and that is all of the hands-on installation, configuration, and problem-solving one must often do to get a node up and running. Let's make it easy to get started and let the technical learning about the inner workings of All-Starlink come later. Yes, I know this is likely to trigger reactions akin to when the code requirement was removed as a requirement for getting licensed. It will be the death of amateur radio, folks said. My pitch to make it easier to use a great technology probably triggers similar feelings, as in, if we make it easy, then we won't get the kind of hams we want to see in our hobby. Well, guess what? The world has changed. Our generation of baby boomers has fewer people in it than some of the younger generations. It's a safe bet that my generation and folks that came before are going to continue to be eclipsed by the sheer number of younger people on the planet. Some percentage of those younger folks will want to do what we did, crack open the case, examine the circuit, and try to understand how it worked. I suspect, though, that an even bigger percentage of younger folks just want an appliance that works without any fuss. I do think there's a fundamental philosophical divide here. On one side are the hams that want to make the barriers to entry fairly high. This is an exclusionary posture that intends to keep out those who don't want to put the work in on the front end. On the other side are the hams that just want to purchase a device and know it will work. I'm sure that almost every one of us has purchased a radio from a vendor and expected it to work when we powered it up. Whether we want to admit it or not, when we do this, we're treating that device as an appliance. When you buy a toaster, all you want to do is plug it in and start making toast. That is really how many of us treat some of our devices. This kind of approach is inclusive because it drops many of the traditional barriers of entry. We won't get many new hams if we are exclusionary. We must be inclusionary if we want our hobby to continue to grow. Growth benefits all of us in amateur radio. Growth supports a strong and more varied vendor community. More people learn about amateur radio and how it benefits communities. The only downside is hearing more people on the air, and somehow that does not seem like a bad thing to me. I think I've made my point that we should be developing pre-built working nodes as virtual machines that can be easily downloaded and installed. Vendors ought to be paying attention to this too, as it gives them an opportunity to offer a working node as a virtual machine that is already configured to work properly with their product. So with that, I'll move on to some of the gory details of how I spent my Saturday, and I promise to skip over the worst of it because you can read all about it in issue 99 if you wish. So the first topic is installing All-Star Link from a virtual machine to Vultr. Vultr is a cloud server company that I use for my node 57945. The TLDR version, or too long didn't read version, is I tried to deploy a new server instance on Vultr of a VirtualBox virtual machine running an All-Star Link node. Although Vultr documentation says it can be done, I did not succeed. Why would you do this? Because ASL3 opens the door to having pre-made All-Star Link appliances that could be easily installed and work consistently. I worked on this project all day on Saturday and did not succeed, but instead I'm reporting that I believe it can be done, even though I haven't been able to do it quite yet. Now, to do something like this on Vultr, you have to import a virtual machine of a working node. Vultr publishes something they call their best practices when migrating to Vultr, and there is a specific section on VirtualBox in that document. That is linked in issue 99. In all truth, I got so frustrated with this process that I took an hour off for a motorcycle ride. That gave me a chance to reset my brain and approach this again with a fresher perspective. To bring a virtual machine instance into Vultr, you have to create a raw image file from the .vdi file in the virtual machine. To create that raw file, you use a command line tool called vboxmanage, and in Windows, that vboxmanage tool comes as part of the VirtualBox application that gets installed. It only runs from the command line. vboxmanage has a very thorough online manual, but trust me when I say it is a lot to wade through. Then you have to extract the ISO file that is part of the virtual machines.ova template, and then you convert that to a raw image file using vboxmanage. The raw image file then must be placed in a location that Vultr can reach to pull the file in. Sound complicated? You bet, it sure is. During this journey, I discovered interesting things about how Vultr expects to access the ISO file, the image file. Vultr wants a URL. They do not provide a direct upload service, and that is pretty awkward. I went down many rabbit holes to try to get the image file to a cloud location that Vultr liked. It turns out they don't like Google Drive, and they don't like OneDrive. Both of those services append some extra information on the end of the file's URL, and Vultr rejects any URL that has such appended information. Of course, they explain this in their document titled How to Upload Custom ISOs to Vultr, but I didn't find that before banging on the problem for a few hours. So what to do? I tried another couple of cloud storage services. I have a pCloud account, but the file size for the image file was quite large, and it was going to take a long time to try to get it up to pCloud. There is another option, and I ended up signing up for it. It's called Vultre's Object Storage. It costs $6 a month, and that $6 gets you a terabyte of storage and a terabyte of transfer bandwidth every month. I was pretty tempted, and after a couple of hours of fighting with ways to fulfill the upload requirement, I did succumb and purchase the object storage from Vultre. By the way, using Vultre Object Storage is not quite as simple as it sounds. You need a client application to move files in and out of storage. I installed a freeware program called S3 Browser and configured it to use my Vultre Object Storage account. Then I created a bucket for my virtual machines. Once I had a bucket, I was able to upload my image file to the bucket. Note that for a large file like this, uploading to object storage does take quite a while. One benefit of using Vultre Object Storage is you get a URL to the file that Vultre likes. I also don't mind having some extra bulk storage available. Figuring out where to put the image file has really been the hardest part of this exercise, or so I thought. Alright, let's suppose you have the proper image file. Next you have to deploy a server on Vultre. This is detailed in issue 99, but in summary, to deploy a server, you set up a new cloud compute instance on Vultre. In Products, you select Cloud Compute. I chose Cloud Compute Shared CPU for this test, and selected Seattle as the location of that server. Under Choose Image, you select Upload ISO, then in the My ISOs prompt, click the plus sign next to the Upload ISO. Enter the URL where your image file is located, and let it upload. If no errors are reported, you can proceed. There's an asterisk to this, which I'll come to in a moment. Then under Choose Plan, I selected AMD High Performance, and under that option, I selected the smallest, the 25 gigabyte NVMe option at $6 a month. I also accepted the Auto Backups edition at $1.20 a month. The asterisk to this is the upload ISO step is where I repeatedly failed. I tried to upload an OVA file. Nope, errors. I tried renaming the OVA file to an ISO file. Nope. I opened the OVA template and extracted the VDI file. Nope. Then used VBox Manage to convert the VDI file to an image file in RAW format. And that should have worked according to Vultre's documentation, but it didn't. I spent 8 hours on this on Saturday, and that's usually the time I'm recording and editing this very podcast, so I'm a day behind my self-imposed schedule. I'm going to set this aside for now, but the idea of being able to export and save working node configurations as virtual machines, and then importing one of those virtual machines into a cloud server seems like it should work. It also seems like having a library of working node configurations for various purposes would benefit the amateur radio community. It might just take someone smarter than me to make this work. Item 2 in issue 99 is the question, did you get your start with CB radio? It is often very interesting to listen to amateur radio operators talk about citizens band radio. I often hear a sense of derision from other hams as they talk about quote-unquote, those CBers and their bad radio practices. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I have to say there are plenty of hams who have pretty atrocious radio practices. I suspect that many of us who enjoy amateur radio now once had a CB radio. I know I did. When we lived in northern Nevada in the very early 1980s, we had a landline phone and a CB radio. There were no such thing as cell phones. With a fairly inexpensive CB and a mag mount antenna, you had comms when the landlines went out and when driving. Reno was a 4-hour drive to the west, Salt Lake City was a 4-hour drive to the east, and Boise was 4 hours to the north. The countryside was largely empty, and we could sometimes drive for an hour or more without seeing another vehicle. CB was a lifeline on the highway. This was in the era of C.W. McCall's popular song, Convoy. In our half-ton Chevy pickup, we looked like David to the large multi-wheeled Goliaths on the highway. Every long-haul trucker had a CB, and many were willing to talk. I really can't count how often we whiled away the hours tagging along with a group of big trucks, listening to their conversations and sometimes joining in. It was often humorous, occasionally a bit salty, and it helped us stay awake. I had forgotten some of these memories until a conversation on an amateur radio net about how people got started in amateur radio. One set of life experiences I had that was generally positive was using a CB radio in the 80s. This didn't cause me to get my amateur license, but it didn't hurt either. And I do wonder how many of us got our start in two-way radio with a CB rig. Item 3 is a warning from Ham Shack Hotline about the busy lamp feature. Recently, I received an email from the Ham Shack Hotline folks titled BLF and Speed Dial No-Nos. Well, that is a bit of a teaser, so I went ahead and read the message. The crux of the message was, if you still use speed dial with either parameter of BLF or sub, your phone still sends the request to the Ham Shack Hotline server asking for the status of the remote extensions over and over and over every second. Those requests put a huge strain on the server. There are currently several hundred users on the HHUS server that have not stopped using these forbidden parameters in their speed dial setups. So Ham Shack Hotline will be turning on the IP ban rule for users who are still using BLF. You should also be aware that almost all softphone apps have a BLF feature as well, and those are set to on by default. All HHUS users will need to turn off the BLF feature in their softphone apps and in their hardphones by 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday the 19th, or the automated rule check that gets turned on will ban your IP address and your phones will stop connecting to the HHUS server. There are additional links in issue 99. Item 4 is a discussion of what I call my tech stack, my technology stack, or my daily drivers. My technology stack is where my personal and work lives intersect, and I describe some of the items I use every day. The things that are backups or are only occasionally used may or may not be mentioned, and this is not an exhaustive list of the technology I have on hand. Rather, it's just the top layer on the cake. For computing, I use a Lenovo ThinkPad X1 laptop, which I have named the Tombook. For storage, I have a Lenovo ThinkStation P510. Great machine, really love it. That is named the Tom Server. I have a backup laptop, which is a Microsoft Surface laptop, and as you might imagine from the naming conventions, that's named the Tom Surface. I also have backup storage, a Synology box, a Synology DS220 Plus with a couple of 3 terabyte hard drives. I install Tailscale on almost every machine I operate. Tailscale allows me to easily make connections through my firewalls from near and far. For example, to operate my Olympia, Washington machine from Portland, Oregon, I use Microsoft Remote Desktop, or RDP, over Tailscale. And when in Olympia, I can reach my Portland machines the same way. My Raspberry Pis all have Tailscale on them. Even my Synology device has Tailscale. This software has been a tremendous help because I travel so much. I also have network routers. Yes, routers plural. My main router at home is a gl.inet GL-MT6000 Flint 2 router. It's pretty solid. It's been pretty seamless. It allows me to have VPN on it, and I also run AdGuard Home on it to help protect everyone in the household. One of the reasons I like this router is Tailscale runs natively on it. As a backup, I have an interesting little device called a Linkstar H68K that I wrote about in May 2024, and there's a link in issue 99. That unit does not run any kind of filtering or screening, and so when I occasionally need to bypass my protective layers, I just switch to that router for that little bit of work and then back to my more protective router. I also keep an older TP-Link router as a backup to the backup, just in case something surges and fries some equipment. By the way, I do have most of my networking gear plugged into an APC brand uninterruptible power supply. The other piece of home networking is not hardware, it's software, and that is I use NextDNS for filtering and for handling my DNS queries. For daily drivers in amateur radio communications, I have a variety of things. I did not say radios on purpose, and that's because some of my preferred methods don't involve radio much, at least on my end. My Portland home has truly awful RF interference, so I've gravitated toward digital voice systems. All of my systems are connected to larger systems elsewhere that do have significant RF-related aspects, so to me, these still fall into the realm of amateur radio. Of course, All-Star Link is on this list. ASL was the first digital voice medium I adopted in a big way. I have several nodes at home, a couple that can travel with me, and one node number 57945, running on a Vultr cloud server. I do have a DMR hotspot and radio that I occasionally fire up and use. I have it if needed, but I find I don't use it very much. Similarly, my ICOM ID 5100A mobile radio does D-Star. There just isn't a lot of D-Star traffic around me, so I generally leave this machine in the box, turned off. On the C4FM side, there's RF and there's Wires X. For portables, I primarily use two radios, an FT3D and an FT5D. For mobile, I run a Yaesu FTM300DR radio. At home, I have a second FTM300DR running as a Wires X portable digital node. This machine is on unless we're leaving for more than an hour or two. I also have a hotspot running WPSD that is dedicated to Yaesu System Fusion. The FT3D and FT5D radios play very nicely with this hotspot. I would say that my two most used digital voice systems are All-Star Link and C4FM. The audio clarity is really helpful, especially as my hearing slowly changes with age. For HF radio, my longtime friend is a Yaesu FT450D. I've used it in the shack and also for POTA. I also have a Yaesu FT891, which is certainly more portable than the 450, but I'm more comfortable with the 450. I also have several Mesh-tastic devices. As I learn more about this technology, it spurs my thinking about how it could be used. I'm curious about Mesh-tastic, even though it doesn't seem to have many uses that align with my radio hobby. So those are the bits of my tech stack that I touch and use almost every day. Item 5 is on the bench, and the first item up in the bench segment is a power problem with my Yaesu FTM300DR. I had a problem with my Yaesu FTM300DR operating as a mobile in the pickup truck. I would turn it on, and about 30 seconds later it would go dark. Rinse and repeat over and over and over. It was a very hot day that day, and I thought, well, maybe the control head on the dash is getting too hot, so I moved it off the dash to a shaded part of the air-conditioned interior. That did not fix it. I checked the antenna connection, and it was tight at the antenna and at the radio. So what was left? If it wasn't internal to the radio, the only likely thing left was power. I moved this radio from rig to rig, so I use a PowerWorks 12-volt plug adapter for power. In this particular adapter, there's a small screw collar at the tip of the plug that secures a spring-loaded tip. When I inspected it, I saw it was partly unscrewed. Once I screwed that back into place and reinserted the adapter, the radio stopped shutting down. Now, I know that using a 12-volt adapter is not a robust solution, but since I moved the radio from rig to rig, it has worked pretty well most of the time. I suppose it might be better to wire in an Anderson power pole pair and use that in my rigs. Also in issue 99, I discuss an interesting little ARM-based device that runs Debian 12 called the Core MP135 by M5 stack. This is an industrial controller. It isn't much larger than two small matchboxes stacked on top of each other. And what I imagined was maybe I could install All-Star Link on this tiny thing. There are two operating system images available. One is for controlling devices, and the other is a Debian 12 instance that is, unfortunately, very limited. I say limited because the root file system is quite small. In the M5 stack implementation, the root file system is 100% full. I've fiddled a bit with FDisk and GDisk, but I think I'm going to have to try to mount the micro SD card in a different machine to expand the root file system. Why does this matter? Well, I can run apt-update as root, but there's no room to install any updates. If I don't have any room for updates, I won't have room to try to shoehorn All-Star-Link on board either. This remains very much an experiment. Also on the bench is an old Heathkit shortwave receiver. The crew over at Ham Radio Workbench were talking in episode 213 about rejuvenating old radios, and that reminded me of the old Heathkit Mohican receiver I have sitting in a corner of the workbench. I wrote about that last December. I'm feeling compelled to pull that out of the corner and at least open it up. I'll bet some of the capacitors are shot. One reason I wanted to get a Heathkit is the layout likely has plenty of room for me to get in and work on it, and if I muck it up, I'm not out much money. I've got some other old devices boxed up that I hope to modify someday. One is a Heathkit HD15 phone patch that I'd like to use as the housing for an All-Star-Link node. But as I thought about this little project, I realized that the Kenwood PC-1A phone patch controller already has an 8-pin microphone receptacle, so I ordered one in good shape from an eBay seller. Delivery is projected to be Monday, July 15th, so I'll probably be able to add a photo of it to issue 99 before it publishes on July 19th. Turning this into a sound interface for my All-Star-Link desktop node should be a fun little build. Item 6 is Tech Trivia Drones Splash Down. I saw the headline and I had to read the article because once upon a time I almost lost my drone in a lake. The headline was, SeaTac's $40,000 4th of July fail, 55 drones drop into Angle Lake. 55 of 200 drones losing their GPS locks seems a bit suspicious, but what piqued my interest was the drones operating over water. I had an incident 2 years ago where my DJI drone was hovering over the surface of a lake and I lost control of the aircraft. Later, I learned that not only does my drone use GPS for positioning, but it also uses the view of the surface below it for relative positioning. I think the lightly rippled surface, moving from the light breeze and reflecting the bright sun, confused the drone. When I told it to return home, it did nothing. When I tried to pilot it back to the dock, it went away from the dock. When I tried to pilot it away from the dock, it went further away. I was stumped and pretty worried because I had no control. Finally, I turned off my controller and then turned it back on. That forced a new connection with the drone, and about 30 seconds later I had control again. The drone still couldn't find home, but at least I could pilot it back to land for a safe landing. I don't know what happened with the SeaTac drones, but losing control of a drone is not unusual. I'm glad no people were injured and no property was damaged. What does this have to do with amateur radio? Not much, other than RF was involved. Item 7 is closing. Well, not much RF-based radio is in this issue. I had wanted to report success on the proof of concept installation of an All-Star-Link node on a virtual machine moved to a cloud server, and there is certainly more work to be done on that topic. Hopefully, I'll have a bit more on traditional radio in the next issue, which is issue 100 on July 26, 2024. On a more personal note, I just bought a BMW C400 GT scooter. This is a single-cylinder scoot that can run on the freeway but is happier around town. I have a 2008 Suzuki Bergman 650 that has carried me many thousands of miles around the Pacific Northwest, but it has grown too long in the tooth to depend on. The BMW is loaded with technology, so my learning curve right now is very steep. The bike and my helmet have Bluetooth, so I'm starting to noodle on how to add a ham radio to this package. I think it would be a blast to have some QSOs while motorcycling. With that, I'll say thank you to all in 73. This is KJ7T, and I'm clear.